We are in Champions League, man.
That was my next
Dilly din, dilly dong, come on.
Encara Messi, 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 gol, 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 gol.
Into Sheringham, and Solskjaer has won it.
I will love it if we beat them. Love it.
This is the Modern Soccer Coach Podcast with Gary Curneen.
Hello, welcome to the Modern Soccer Coach Podcast. My name is Gary Curneen. Joining us for this episode is Brian Deane, former striker with Leeds United, Sheffield United, a few other Premier League clubs in there as well. He's the first ever goal scorer in Premier League history, of course. Also coach of Norwegian side Sarpsborg. He's also been a club owner at a side in Kosovo. Fantastic insight here to his journey, also his views on coaching and management as well. Some brilliant stuff. Love to hear your thoughts at Gary Curneen on Instagram, at Gary Curneen on Twitter. This podcast is sponsored by Wildcard, a social engagement platform for youth sports teams. From creating programs to managing schedules, Wildcard runs your team on autopilot. If you are a youth coach who not only wants to communicate with players on scheduling and practice times, but also wants to engage with them on video feedback, conversations around the game, then I highly recommend you checking them out. With Wildcard, coaches can boost engagement using chat, video and virtual challenges. They can recognize athletes via badges and profiles. They can organize simpler scheduling, notifications, registrations, and stats. And you can also send automated COVID assessments before games and practices, as well as rapidly onboard teams with invite by link and role delegation. I've seen the platform myself. I've taken a walk through it, and I would highly recommend it. Lots of coaches at the minute, they're taking a break from training, so it's a great opportunity to do some research and implement a really enjoyable and productive communication platform with your team in the new year. Please go ahead, check Wildcard out. They're doing a special promotion at the moment where the first 50 coaches to download it can use it for free. That's right, first 50 coaches to download it, use it for free. Coaches, check this out. The link is on the podcast information, or you can go straight to Wildcard, wildkard.io and download it. Definitely check them out. Here is Brian. Enjoy. Brian, thanks so much for joining me today on the Modern Soccer Coach Podcast. Really, really excited to have you on.
It's always interesting to talk football.
Your background and your journey, very, very interesting. The player, the manager, the football club owner. The first question I want to ask is, which one's the toughest one?
Well, the football owner, club owner thing is not really as, it seems. I mean, we kind of went in there to try and help a club. We had some ideas, and basically, they it's one of those where we thought we had some modern ideas, kind of things changed, and respectfully, we've kind of come out of that. So it's not really going to go ahead. But in terms of the football and the management side of it, I think the best way to summarise it is by saying, what I did as a player was it came natural. Being a footballer and being in control of that situation is quite easy. I think when you're coaching and managing, you understand a lot more about the whole holistic approach to football and what it means to make sure that you get everything right. I borrowed a lot of my kind of what I thought was out. I went into management, and all of the managers that I played under had something to offer me, and I chose which bits I thought were relevant and would be useful in my type of management, and then the stuff that I thought, well, no, I wouldn't do it like that. That was almost like a warning as to how not to do things based on my own experience as a player under certain managers. And I think I would sum it up by saying, you try and create an environment that everybody wants to flourish in, and you want to make things fun. You want to make sure that players want to come in and not want to be on the treatment table, and all of those kind of things are things that happen to me as a player, where you see when players, when they don't want to go out there, when they might have a hamstring niggle and it's a 10-day job, but because things aren't going so well, they make it into a 3-week job, for example. So you've got to have your wits about you. And I used all of those experiences to help to make me the manager that I wanted to play for.
We'll get to the management. I'm going to go through some of your playing stuff first, and then we'll get to the management side. But I just wanted to stay there on, with so much about how coaching has changed and so much of the modern stuff and the science and the tactics. Do you think sometimes that we forget that what you said there, that the players want to come in and enjoy it every day and be a part of something?
Yeah, I definitely feel like there are some brilliant aspects of modern coaching, but I also feel that we want to take a lot of the enjoyment out of it with the way how we do things. And I base that on the fact that there are a lot of coaches who haven't played but feel like they can pick up a book and talk about what players should be going through. Look, we're all different as people, and I think psychologically, to play the game, you need to understand how people can be feeling from 1 minute to the next. So there's a lot to take on, and I think that what I've learned is that when I was playing, a lot of the coaching techniques that we had were lazy and outdated, and we didn't talk about how you kind of set up and work towards a plan. That includes things like periodization. That includes how you might work over a week, the science behind it, the timings, what kind of areas you're gonna play in, what is relevant to what you're going to be doing. And I think, looking back, a lot of the time it wasn't relevant to what we were doing. So consequently, when you go on to the park, it doesn't fit what you've been working on all week. And I think that's important. I think we've become better at that, but definitely there's the other side of it where you have to keep challenging players. You have to keep challenging them to develop. And I think that because I played at the top level, when you go in and you're going for a transfer, for a large amount, there is less coaching and development then, because everybody expects that they're getting the finished product. And because of that, you actually, sometimes players stop developing. I think that it becomes more about, and it's down to players as well to kind of search out ways of improving themselves as well. You can't just expect a coach to develop you all the time. You've got to look at yourself and say, well, where am I going wrong? How can I be better? And so on. But the other thing that we need to think about is how immature players are in that period of time. They're also, everybody thinks they're immortal at 20 to 30. And then other things start kicking in and being more important, like families, kids, having to provide for your family. And these are all things that affect players and their performances, believe it or not.
You've probably got the start of this one a million times about the first goal of the Premier League history. I know I was a United fan growing up, so you broke my heart at the time. I thought, even though we went on to win that league, I thought, oh, here we go, another season and not winning anything. So appreciate that. But whenever your goal almost symbolised the change in the Premier League, there was an influx of the foreign players, the back pass rule change, coverage started going 24/7. As a player, how did you see the game on the pitch change in England over the next few years?
I think what was relevant was the thing that it was when you look back and you see every club had a new kit, for example. So we started off on that; it was a fresh start. There were subtle changes, but I think from a player's point of view, the things that started to matter was the fact that we were going to get more coverage on television, and we were going to be seen more rather than, maybe 10 minutes on Match of the Day or so on. All of a sudden, players could showcase what they were about. It obviously brought a higher level of scrutiny along with it as well. But, it was something that we were craving at the time. And then obviously the whole kind of Premier League thing just exploded into what it is now. And, I think it's been fantastic, but I also feel that what it's allowed, the amount of money that came into the game, and don't get me wrong, money's good for the game, but what it's allowed is it's allowed people to be lazy. And when I say that, I think you only have to look at some of the exorbitant fees that get paid for players. Now, there's nothing wrong if you're going to buy an asset for, let's say, £15 million, and then you're going to develop it into something that becomes worth £30 million, and that happens a lot. But we also throw a lot of money without structure behind it, and if you did that in industry, you'd get hauled across the coals. But because we're playing in a football's about the holy grail of being able to stay in the Premier League, we kind of, there are different sort of like strategies depending on where you are in the league. But I always, me personally, if I was a club owner, or if I was building a club strategy, I was always err on the side of making sure that there is a proper engagement with the community, and the community understand what what the club is trying to improve, what the club is trying to actually achieve. I think that's very important, because that way you get to, you get time, you get the buy-in from everybody, and everybody works together in that community. I remember when I was managing, I know we're jumping now, but because you work, and they have, when I went to Norway, they said, look, this is how we want to play. This is the budget. We're renowned for playing this way, but we want to be more professional. And working to those parameters, I think, are good. And that, the structure in a lot of ways was better, because I think that you can bring people in who don't understand, and you might not necessarily have a structure. And that's when it all goes wrong. And we've seen how many times it can go wrong with clubs going through the floor. You have chief executives who are, giving everybody what they want, and it ends up in tears.
It's almost like a fantasy land sometimes, that when we watch outside looking in, and you watch these, like the Sunderland documentaries, and you see how they're run, and you think, oh wow, there's a lot, like you said there's still a lot of emotion involved in making decisions. Going back to the community engagement piece, do you think over the last 7 to 8 months with COVID and the football world being turned upside down, do you think clubs have moved further apart from their fan base, or do you think some have made an opportunity to get closer in that respect?
I think definitely now. I think when you look at some of the smaller clubs, the way how they have to engage with their stakeholders, they obviously have to try and get closer, because the community, clubs rely on the community, whether it's the guy who's making the programs, whether it's the caterers, whoever it is, they all of a sudden they have to watch every penny. So you have to manage that. Whether it's like that at the top level, I don't know. I think some clubs, I had a conversation with somebody, and You know, even some of the clubs in the Premier League were living month to month, and I think that's really bad and poor management. Look, I mean, whether clubs are going to, have a look at themselves, restructure, I don't know. I mean, unfortunately for me, I don't at this moment in time have that kind of engagement with a club. But I do sort of like stand on the outside and see a lot of the time that it almost becomes a personal quest when it's, people need to take the long view when it comes to clubs. And, we need to temper expectations, shall we say. At the beginning of a Premier League season, only maybe 4 clubs can win the league, and then we hear about clubs wanting to break into the top 4 and go for Europe. Well, what's your strategy behind that, and how long does it last? We've seen where clubs can get come up like Fulham did and spend 100 million and then get relegated because it doesn't bond. You're much better off. Making sure that you have a strategy that grows year on year, and sometimes, fans can be the problem because they'll demand. I hear things. I mean, I don't. Everybody talks about Mike Ashley. I don't really know too much. I know the Newcastle fans hate him, for example, but there's a guy who spent a lot of money on a club, and when they've gone down, he supported them. They're back up. And it's personal to him. So that's just one example. You brought the example of Sunderland, where that's a massive club as well, and that was just poorly managed. And it's people making those emotional decisions, and kind of like going above the head of what is reasonable in terms of a decision like buying a player. How much should you spend, and then it becomes an emotional decision to say, yeah, I'm taking a punt on this. Well, football's not like that. Football can be like a gamble.
The game changing, and then obviously it took a while for the Premier League, the international managers. Obviously, the investment brought the changes in the management structure as well, and sometimes we glorify the foreign coaches that come in, but you played for some really, really good English managers, British managers. Which ones do you look back and think they were different class?
Okay, so there's 2 ways to talk about playing for managers. Some are inspirational. It was only after I went into coaching that I kind of understood more about what a weak structure should look like. Some of the coaches that I had were brilliant. They really were. Techniques changed over the years because we had, all coaches had to get better because, like you say, the foreign coaches coming in, all of a sudden they had very structured, methodical ways of doing things, and they were getting results. And a lot of that is because confidence was growing inside of players because they spent a whole week perhaps doing a lot of tedious training, but also everything revolved around being out there on a Saturday and getting a result rather than let's come in, let's have 5-a-side games all day or whatever, and then you go out there on a Saturday and everybody's looking at each other like, there were very few clubs I feel could do that, and I remember when I came into the top division and played against Liverpool, every single player in that team knew about spatial awareness and keeping the ball, and even playing in 5-a-side tournaments against Liverpool's or older players. These were guys who were very, very impressive in terms of how they played the game. So everybody has to, the coaches coming in, for me, were brilliant, but sometimes it's also a case of you're just getting the wheel regurgitated. We talk about high press and all the rest of it. Yes, the structures are better, but it's what people were doing anyway.
I wanted to get your thoughts on this. So as a centre forward, you've seen some of the things today is bringing in a positional coach.
Yeah.
Would you have wanted, needed, appreciated a positional coach when you were a player?
Definitely. I think people don't. I mean, look. There were times that I played, and what people forget is the most important part of a game is making sure that it's defensively keeping sound, but then also you have to score goals. If you've got good forwards, then that's the most important part of your team. So having a kind of mentor or somebody who understood, what it was like, what it was like emotionally to step over the line. Even when you talk about things like body language, I remember when I went to Leeds and in my first season there, I struggled a little bit because, I'd gone from Sheffield United, which I'd grown up with them and we got promoted together. And then I went into Leeds, where it's my hometown club. And, there was a lot of expectation because I'd cost a lot of money. And my old Sunday League manager used to come to the games, and he picked up on stuff that I was doing that people in the coaching staff didn't. And he said to me, Brian, he said, when the ball's out on the right, hold your run. Hold your run, because if the ball comes in the box, what I was tending to do was sometimes run past the front post. So I'm not giving myself a chance, but I think a lot of that came down to confidence and want to be seen to be doing the right things, which, only when you kind of hear it from somebody who's looking at you and saying, right, Brian, you don't need to make the run yet. You make your run away first to buy a yard, and then you go and it's about your timing. I kind of, when I look at games and I look at centre forwards now, and some of them are struggling, and I think I know why you're running under the ball, but you're getting further and further away from building back up your confidence. So somebody's got to give you some kind of instruction. So yeah, I think when you think about the kind of money that's involved in the game now, you need people involved who know the game. Who you might be talking about a defensive coach. I mean, some of the defending that I see nowadays is absolutely shocking. Nobody knows how to defend. You only need to get a good centre forward into the centre of the goal, and people don't know where to defend and how to defend. Everybody defends facing the ball watching. Nobody does shoulders across the park, for example. So you don't know what's behind you. But the problem you have with that is that if you're a head coach, you're not going to want somebody like myself coming in and telling your centre forwards how to play. And I can see why as well, because if all of a sudden that player goes totally off the boil, it's your neck on the line.
Talk about Leeds United there. Do you think that's the difference between Bielsa, is that it's not just his courage tactically, but I mean, he does things outside the box. Do you think that's part of it as well?
Well, I don't know. I mean, look, I don't know what Bielsa does. I'm not going to turn around here and say that he's a master tactician, because I just don't know what he does. People say that it's all high intensity work. I'll say this. When I saw that group of players performing under the last manager, you wouldn't believe that it was the same bunch of players. And I think that sometimes that's because there's no room, there's no hiding place anymore. When you bring in somebody like him, you can't blame it on the coach anymore. The players have got to step up or they're out, And I think that can happen as well. But yeah, I mean, he's highly respected. I mean, he's obsessive in his preparation. But actually what he does tactically, I have no idea, because I don't know anybody who's down there. I don't ask. But he's got something. I mean, if you think about what he's done, what he did at Bilbao, And the other clubs that he's had, he's obviously an astute guy and a master tactician. I mean, they play some fantastic football, and the preparation that goes into that must be fantastic. But I wouldn't know, what his preparation is, how he sets his week up and so on.
Going back to your Middlesbrough days, what was it like? It must have been a dream playing with Gascoigne and Janino. How was that experience?
I mean, look, Paul wasn't Paul at Lazio or Tottenham. There's a different character and a different creature altogether. I mean, there were occasional glimpses of, unbelievable skill and vision and so on. Janino was fantastic. Although when he first came to the Premier League and I played against him then, that's when he was really special. But it was, don't get me wrong, it was great to be on the same pitch as those guys and being in that company. You kind of, you measure yourself. I mean, there was other players, Christian Ziege, Alan Boksic, the likes of Guy Pallister, Mark Schwarzer, some fantastic players, Paul Ince, so yeah, it was, Middlesbrough was an interesting thing because Brian Robson brought in players, who, established players, and by and large, we it was a fantastic project. But it's also so difficult to attract players to the northeast at times. Because if you're bringing in players from abroad, they want to be in London. Their heads get turned. If clubs are interested in them, and so on. But no, it was great. It was a fascinating time for me to be in and around those guys, and those guys were world stars.
Just take a quick break here. This podcast is brought to you by Wildcard. Wildcard is a social engagement platform for youth sports teams. From creating programs to managing schedules, Wildcard runs your team on autopilot. If you're a youth coach who not only wants to communicate with players on scheduling, but also wants to go that one step further to engage with them on videos, on feedback, and conversations around the game, then I highly recommend you checking them out. They're doing a special at the moment. The first 50 coaches to download it can use it for free. Coaches, please go ahead, check it out. This is the bargain of a lifetime. You can check them out on wildcard with a K.io, or you can get the link on the podcast information. I've seen the platform myself. I've taken a look at it. It's absolutely brilliant. Great way to challenge players, to support players, to engage with players, to communicate with players and parents as well. Top class. Check out Wildcard. Really appreciate them sponsoring the podcast. Back to Brian. The Benfica move. This was before probably Portugal. It was become a bit of a powerhouse in football, just with the Euros and the coaches they've developed over the last few years. How was your experience with the football culture there? Did you enjoy it? Did you learn a lot, or was it frustrating?
No, it wasn't frustrating. There was nothing frustrating about it. I mean, I think you realise how big a club is when you're playing, and after 20 minutes, if you're not scored, you got 70,000 fans wondering why, and that was a lot of pressure. It was great when things were going good. It was almost a little bit like a soap opera at times as well. But overall, it was I'd always wanted to go and play abroad, and so getting that opportunity, if I'd have turned it down, I might have been here at home now, going down a different path, and wondering what it would have been like if I'd have gone out there. And I have some kind of, when I look back at what I did out there, I can sort of like hold my head up and say, well, you made a really positive contribution. We when I went out there, I think we were 6th or 7th, and we finished second. We won the Lisbon derby away 4-1, and I got they said I was the man of the match. I scored in that game, and then we beat Porto 3-0 at home, scored in that, a very good goal again. And but yeah, I mean, I went out there and I looked at the Portuguese players and I saw how good they were technically. They were on a different level to what we had over here. And I was like, I remember England played Portugal and beat them 3-0 at Wembley. And I remember thinking, if they can get their mentality right over there, they will be right up at the top level. And I don't think England have beaten them since.
Just on that, like, what's really interesting when I was reading about that there was obviously Graham Souness brought you over. Souness comes across really well on the TV. The way he communicates it. Obviously, he doesn't take any nonsense. But his managerial career, we had Jim Agilton on here about 2 or 3 months ago when he was talking about how brilliant he was for relating to his position. Do you think that Souness doesn't get the credit he deserves sometimes as a manager?
I don't know, really. I mean, he had some very good jobs. He did very well.
Yeah.
I think that, I mean, Graham spent a fair portion of his time abroad as well. And because he was quite, he was always kind of a big personality. When you're winning games, everybody loves it. But when you're not winning games, he stands up for himself. So, I was fortunate to be with him, and he was telling me why he changed his managerial style from when he was at Liverpool, and it was because he'd had a triple heart bypass. And in his mind, he was like, well, you know what? Why am I going to kill myself? And I think he's got it off to a T now where he's, people don't like him being outspoken sometimes, and they might think, well, he's old and he's no, you know what? That guy's done it at the top level, and it doesn't change. I mean, we get things a little bit more shiny nowadays or whatever, but the psychology in football never changes. Just
on that there, then last couple for you, and I'll let you run. Whenever you went to Sarpsborg, first managerial experience, and how difficult is having that first experience abroad in terms of adjusting and changing and adapting than it would have been at home?
Yeah, I think because I'd played abroad, I kind of looked at it, and I looked at it as more of a challenge and something to overcome. And when I went out there, I just, like I said, I took all the managers that I played under with me, and I tried to address circumstances, thinking how some of them would have addressed those circumstances. And I think it worked. As well as my experiences, I kind of looked at how, I'd watched some managers coming in for the first day, like George Graham, and I thought, okay, what gave George Graham that kind of respect? And it was, he came in and he said, look, I'm going to be fair with you. Everybody's going to get a chance. I don't have favourites. But, if you don't work hard for me or the team, then I'm not going to put up with it. And I remember being in the changing rooms and thought, well, I like that, because I'd rather play for a manager who's going to judge me on me being honest, or as honest as I can. If I can't get in the team off the back of that, then, and it's a little bit old school as well. So that was one aspect of management that I used, and I kept my distance from the players by and large, but I also knew how to engage with them. I think where a lot of managers in my day fell down was they didn't know how to manage players. And I was a victim myself of poor man management. So I made sure that when I became a manager, if I was going to drop somebody, I'd tell them, and I'd continue to engage with them. I'd leave the door open, and I'd say to you, well, this is what you need to do to get back in the team. But I think the main thing is just honesty. Sometimes players don't always agree with what you're saying, but if you confront them and you engage and say, look, this is why, then they're going to respect it.
Yeah, it's interesting, Brian, because from a coaching community perspective, we've got this thing at the minute where it's all about relationships, and obviously, like, coaches, when they're watching on TV, they see the really, really small percentage. You see Klopp hugging someone, you see Guardiola high-fiving someone, and you think that it's about almost becoming their friend. But what you're saying there is that you would rather have the honesty. Like, I still think that exists today.
Yeah, I think, look, I mean, that's just one aspect. I mean, we've only had 5 minutes, but you create a siege mentality with your squad and your players. You build respect, and that's all part of it. You know, if your team is going to give you everything, then I was never shy to show emotion, because some managers were like the teacher you had at school who, if you did really well, you knew it because he very seldom gave praise out. And some people react differently. You've got to be able to manage all different types of personalities to get the best out of them. So one technique might not necessarily be the same. You work the same way as it would for somebody else, but that's being clever. That's about, we had managers I had managers who would manage everybody the same, and then what would happen would be you'd lose half the squad because there was some people who resented the fact that some people had better relationships and some people were just there to do their job. So you have to kind of take a holistic approach. And I did that, and I also, I took things from my playing career where, I found myself out of the squad, but, and there was a manager who kind of tried to humiliate me, and I thought I could never do that because I knew what I felt about him and still do to this day. But then there was another manager, one of the best man managers was Mick McCarthy. And Mick, when I went and played for Sunderland, he just said, "Look, Brian, I'm taking you on loan till the end of the season. It's just till the end of the season. There's no contract afterwards. But I know you've got someone, and I want you to help us get over the line." And I could accept that. I don't like, you don't like people talking fluff and nonsense. And there was a lot of that, and I just feel it was very unnecessary sometimes. But especially that one situation was, I look back at the situation where somebody was trying to make an example of me. I remember at the time it was it was pre-season, and we went and played a pre-season game, and I was the only player who didn't get on, and then he came with an excuse to me. I forgot, and I thought it was humiliating, but I thought to myself, that's more of a measure of you than it is me and my ability, and I still had a contract there, but I would never put somebody in that position, because I think once you do, it'll come back and bite you, because there'll be other players there who'll see it and not take too kindly to it.
Brilliant. Last couple for you. What advice would you have for a young coach who's looking at operating and working with professional players eventually?
I think you've got to know your stuff. You can't, if you feel as though you can wing it, then you'll get found out. For me, there's a lot of people in the game who have come in and they'll build false Facebook pages, and they'll say that I was doing this and I've done that, and for me, I kind of, you got to do this hard yards. I was only a manager for 2 years, and it's it was very, very hard work. It was stressful. There's no easy way, but you know what? Those 2 years were backed up by 21 years as a player. So that that's why to a degree I succeeded, because I knew how the players thought, And I think you need to make sure that you put those hours in, understanding. Look, everybody's different. Not everybody's got a playing background. But what you've got to be able to do is you've got to have something, and you've got to be able to give something that's a little bit different. Otherwise, you're just like anybody else.
And you talked about how important it was. Goals change games, and goals are getting harder to come by these days. It seems everyone is lining up to tell you how great their team is, but they just lack a number 9 that scores goals. What would you say to a player who wants to make centre forwards, or sorry, a coach who wants to make centre forwards better? Is it to look at the tactical stuff of the game? Is it the data? Is it the physical stuff? Or where would you say holds the most amount of weight?
It's difficult. I mean, my journey, me becoming a centre forward, and if I could go back and do it again, I was fortunate that I worked with one of the first kind of strength and conditioning coaches in football. We found the margins, those percentages, I'm talking about back in the early 90s where nobody was working on, so I'd look at it from that point of view. I'd look at the psychological side of it. I'd look at movement. And again, I'm fortunate that because of what I did, a lot of that DNA is with me, and it's there. I could pass it on. If I see a centre forward playing, you have to work out what a player's strengths are, and then work on those individual strengths. You can't just say, right, well, I'm going to knock this ball. I'm going to ask you to play between the centre back and the full back, and look into the, look on his shoulder, and we're going to, I want you to look to drop into that space, shall we say. If they haven't got pace, you need pace to play on somebody's shoulder. You look at Jamie Vardy, and there's a player who you would always say, look, play on people's shoulder. People can't live with that, so you would make a program to make sure that he's getting the best. You wouldn't try and turn Jamie Vardy into a centre forward who's gonna make movements when the ball goes out wide to kind of pull off to the far stick, because he's 5'9". So you've got to look at the individual and try and feel how you can improve what he's got. The other thing I'd say, just to finish that off, is that you've got to understand personalities as well. So we talk about in football, they talk about technical, tactical, physical, psychological, and so on. You have to try and understand, and culturally as well, because that's a big area where people don't really understand. Where for example, a black player like myself will have a different background and upbringing to somebody who is white. Because my parents have different, they came here, we eat different food, they have a different culture, and, there are different things in discipline, all kinds. So you need people who understand all of those things, and you can sort of like, that extra sort of like percentage, if you've got somebody, let's say, if you've got somebody who looks like them, for example, then the chances are they're going to be able to unlock something a little bit easier than, I've heard it where I was talking to a guy who's head of an academy, and this particular academy were getting a lot of trialists from the suburbs of Paris. Now, anybody who knows about the suburbs of Paris, that's where, a lot of the very good black African talent come from, the raw talent. And they were getting these guys in, and their coaches couldn't connect with them, so they were dismissing them. And these were B licensed coaches, for example. So what you've actually got is you might have somebody there, but because their development as a coach was going to suffer by trying to understand these players, they were letting them go. So it's the wrong way around, if you get what I mean. The mentality was wrong in that they should be thinking, right, okay, this guy's got some very good attributes. How can I tap into that. How can I improve myself and get the best out of this this individual? You know, how can I be known and renowned for some, you know, and that means, like I said, understanding culture. You know, but we don't do that. We kind of, you know, it might be the other way around as well. I'm not advocating anything. I'm just saying that, you know, you've got to understand what you're dealing with. And sometimes people don't respond to what you're telling them. You've got to try and understand why. You know, I suppose that's probably why I'm not coaching and managing now. But
well, what is the plan? Is it to get back in the sidelines, or is it more as a ownership or strategic manager, executive?
No, I've got no. Look, my coaching, when I came back from Norway, I had 2 years in Norway. I thought it went really well. First year we stayed up with the smallest budget. Second year we finished 8th. Got to the cup semi-final, and I came back, and you know, I couldn't even get an interview, and I remember being on my pro license, and I remember the tutor, you know, he was a brilliant guy, a guy called Jim Fleeting up in Scotland, him and Dognall Park, and Jim was very passionate, and he said, look, you know, you have to keep coaching, even if you lose your job, you got to keep coaching. He said, because the longer you stay out of the game, the harder it is to get back in. And I went 2 years, and I kind of went, you know what, Brian, it's not going to happen. It's not going to happen for you. So it's probably a good time to pack in. And obviously there were other things that kind of came into that. You know, I always felt that I had something to offer, but I wasn't. I got to an age where I thought I can't go run up and down the country trying to compete in those areas, and I kind of just said that's enough for me. In terms of what I'd like to do, I'd like to get involved on the strategic side of a club, and you know. But again, it's, you know, these posts are not easy to come by, and it would have to be the right thing for me as well. It's not something I'm really chasing now anymore. I really enjoyed my time as a coach and a manager, and you know, it's a real roller coaster. You know, different from when you're playing football. But you know, I enjoyed it. But I think it's like a young man. You need to have the support of the people around you. You know, the management, and you know, and I think the kind of role when I came back from Norway, and I was like, you know, we need more sporting directors in this country. You know, we need more people who you know, who are kind of like that middle management. So they're custodians of the club, but they're there to support the manager and the manager coach as well. But you know, until clubs start kind of having more club-owned departments, then they're going to struggle. You know, I think where you know, now, you know, my journey in terms of football is more to do with, you know, myself and some ex-professional footballers set up a company called Phoenix Sports and Management. Phoenix Sports and Media Group, and it's more to do with the other side of football, not agents. It's more to do with helping players deal with the transition from football. So, you know, short courses in clubs, you know, that kind of mentoring side of things, and that understanding. You know, everybody involved played at the top level in the Premier League, and we've kind of married up with best in practice people from business to make sure that we deliver an accountable service. When I say accountable, you know, I'm accountable with Phoenix because my name's attached. You know, I have to vet what we're offering and what we want to deliver, and what we're passionate about. We're not a company that kind of looks at it and says, right, this is something, you know, we're chasing, you know, the big balance sheets. We've got more of a kind of holistic look to to what happens in and around sport, and we want to kind of change the landscape in terms of making players accountable for themselves, or making athletes accountable for themselves. And I really enjoy that. It's, you know, I love my football. The pandemic has kind of made me look a little bit more inwards at what's important to me. You know, you can go out there and you can offer yourself all over the place, and people will always take you up on it if it's free. But it's, you know, when you've got that much experience, it's good to hold back, and if people want you and want those experiences, it's better to consult. So that's kind of where I would want to see myself within a club, helping a club to kind of bring its standards up and help with the infrastructure. So yeah, that's more where I'm at, rather than going into management and spending all my time on the pitch. Recruitment's very interesting to me, because I think that, you know, recruitment, I do kind of wonder sometimes what people are doing with their recruitment. You know, it's we have to create characters. You know, I spoke to a very good friend of mine who, you know, he operates at one of the best clubs in the country, and you know, their idea of youth recruitment is looking into the character of people. You know, what if you're doing an exercise, you know, and there's a forfeit, you know, which of your players are gonna, if it's 10 press-ups, which ones are going to do 8, which ones are going to do 10, and which ones are going to do 12. The one who's doing 12 is the guy who wants to make sure he does 10 good ones. The one who does 10 is the guy who wants to, you know, he's happy doing 10 push-ups. And the one who's doing 8 is the one who's trying to cheat. So those are characters. And you've got to make sure that you have more players in there who want to do 12 press-ups.
Brian, first class. I can't thank you enough for coming on, and really, really enjoyed that. Best of luck with the Phoenix group, and we'll definitely be keeping an eye on that there. And if we can help in any way, please let us know.
No worries, Gary. It's cool. All right.
Brilliant. Cheers, Brian. All the best. Thanks again.
Cheers. Bye.
All the best. Cheers.
Thank you for listening to the Modern Soccer Coach Podcast. For more coaching topics, sessions, and resources, head on over to Coach Kernine on Facebook or visit the website at www.modernsoccercoach.com.